What would you do if you found someone dying and saving them meant fighting the most powerful man in the territory? The question hung in the air like morning mist over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, waiting for an answer that would change two lives forever. October 14, 1878, New Mexico Territory. The autumn wind carried the scent of dying sage across the high desert, whispering secrets through the cottonwood trees that lined the creek beds. 12 miles southwest of Santa Fe, where civilization thinned to nothing but sky and stone. Thomas Brennan rode his Appaloosa mare along the eastern fence line of his ranch. Tom was 35 years old, though the sun and solitude had carved him into someone who looked both younger and older, depending on the light. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hands calloused from rope work and eyes the color of winter sky. His face bore the kind of weathering that came from choosing the company of cattle over people, of preferring the honest simplicity of hard work to the complicated dance of human connection. 3 years. 3 years since Sarah had died, her body consumed by fever, while he held her hand and prayed to a God he wasn't sure existed. 3 years of talking to his horse more than to people, of eating meals alone, of waking in an empty bed, and pretending the silence didn't hurt. The ranch had become both his prison and his sanctuary, 1,200 acres of salvation through exhaustion. Blue, his Appaloosa, had been Sarah's horse. Tom kept her because letting her go felt like losing Sarah twice. Now the mare nickered suddenly, her ears pricking forward toward a cluster of cottonwood trees near the water's edge. Her entire body went rigid, that ancient prey animal instinct that knew when something was wrong. Tom pulled the reins, his own instincts sharpening. He'd learned to trust Blue's senses over his own. His hand moved to the rifle in its saddle scabbard, fingers curling around worn wood as his eyes scanned the golden grass. Then he saw it, something dark against the pale earth, something that didn't belong to the natural landscape, that broke the organic flow of stone and sage and shadow. Tom dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against dried leaves, each step deliberate as he approached. The creek whispered its endless song. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals with patient grace. And there, crumpled among the rocks, like a discarded doll, lay a woman. For one terrible, hollow moment, Tom believed he was looking at a corpse. Her dress, what remained of it, had once been the color of doeskin, traditional Apache style. Now it hung in blood-stained tatters, dark rust against torn fabric. Her face was swollen beyond easy recognition, purple bruises painting brutal art across her cheekbones and jaw. Dark hair, matted with dirt and dried blood, spread around her head like a tragic halo. Her arms bore cuts, some shallow, some deep enough that Tom could see she'd tried to defend herself. One shoulder sat at an odd angle, dislocated and badly reset. Someone had done this deliberately, methodically. This wasn't the random violence of nature or accident. This was human cruelty in its purest form. Then she whimpered. The sound was so faint, so fragile, it might have been the wind itself, if not for the slight movement of her cracked lips. Tom dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he carefully pushed the hair from her damaged face. In all his years, through cattle stampedes and winter storms and the slow death of his wife, he'd never felt fear quite like this. The fear that he was already too late. "Can you hear me?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, rusty from days of speaking only to livestock. "Miss, I'm going to help you." Her eyes fluttered open. Green, the color of spring cottonwood leaves. And in those eyes Tom saw terror so profound it reached into his chest and squeezed his heart until he could barely breathe. Terror and something else. A kind of animal desperation that spoke of horrors he couldn't imagine. She tried to move away from him, her body refusing to obey, managing only a pathetic crawling motion that tore something deep inside him. She thought he was going to hurt her. She thought every man was going to hurt her now. Easy now. Tom gentled his voice the way he did with frightened horses with newborn calves who didn't yet understand the world wasn't entirely cruel. "I won't hurt you. I swear on my mother's grave I won't hurt you." Those green eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, looking for the threat, looking for any sign that his kindness was just another trap. He held still, let her look, let her see whatever she needed to see. Seconds stretched like hours. The creek kept singing. The hawk kept circling. And slowly, so slowly, she stopped struggling. Her body went limp with exhaustion and surrender. Or maybe, just maybe, with the smallest seed of trust. Tom removed his coat, the heavy sheepskin-lined duster that Sarah had given him on their second anniversary, and wrapped it carefully around her shivering form. When he lifted her into his arms, she weighed almost nothing. He could feel her bones through the thin fabric of her ruined dress, could feel her ribcage with each shallow breath. Whoever had done this hadn't just beaten her, they'd starved her first. That was when he saw it. Her hand, clutched tight even in unconsciousness, held a small piece of turquoise on a leather cord. A necklace child-sized, gripped with the desperation of someone holding on to the only thing that mattered. Tom's throat tightened. Somewhere there was a child missing this necklace, missing its mother. The ride back to his ranch took nearly an hour. Tom held her against his chest the entire way, feeling each shallow breath like a prayer answered, like proof that God might exist after all. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring words he couldn't understand, Apache phrases that carried the weight of grief and fear. Sometimes she cried silently, tears tracing clean paths through the dirt on her face. He didn't try to talk to her. He just held her steady, kept her warm, and pushed Blue as fast as he dared without causing more pain. By the time they reached his cabin, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Tom carried her inside, laid her on his own bed, the one he'd shared with Sarah, and covered her with the quilt his grandmother had made. Then he rode hard to town to fetch Doc Patterson. But Samuel Chen wasn't Patterson. Dr. Samuel Chen was 48 years old, Chinese, and the best physician in 3 territories, despite the fact that half the town refused to see him based purely on the color of his skin. Tom had stopped caring about that kind of stupidity years ago, right around the time Chen had saved the life of Tom's ranch hand after a rattlesnake bite. Tom found him at his clinic, a small building on the edge of Santa Fe that served everyone the white doctors wouldn't touch. Indians, Chinese, Mexicans, the poor of any color. Chen looked up from his medical texts as Tom burst through the door, immediately reading the urgency in his stance. "Tom, it's late. What's wrong?" "Found a woman by the creek, beaten badly. She's Apache." Chen paused for just a moment, understanding the complications that single word carried. Then he nodded, already reaching for his medical bag. "I'll get my supplies. Doc, I know this could bring trouble." Chen interrupted him with a raised hand and a slight smile. "2 years ago you stood between my family and a mob. I owe you more than one favor." He moved with efficient grace, packing bandages, medicines, surgical tools. "Medicine has no color, Tom, only suffering and the duty to ease it." They rode back together, Chen on a borrowed horse, his medical bag secured behind his saddle. The sun had fully set, now stars beginning to emerge in that vast New Mexico sky, brilliant and cold and indifferent to human suffering. By the time they reached the ranch, night had fallen completely. Tom led Chen inside, lit the lamps, and watched as the doctor approached the bed where she lay still unconscious, still barely breathing. Chen's face remained professionally neutral, but Tom saw his jaw tighten as he began his examination. Tom stepped outside to give her privacy, stood on the porch, and looked at the stars. Sarah had loved the stars. She'd known their names. Their stories had taught him the constellations on winter nights when the world seemed made of ice and light. He touched the brim of his hat, the gesture he made when thinking of her. "Sarah, I think you sent her to me. I don't know why, but I'll do right by her, I promise." The door opened behind him. Chen stepped out, medical bag in hand, his face grave in the lamplight. "She'll live, but Tom, the things done to her." He paused, choosing words carefully. This wasn't random violence. Someone wanted to break her, systematically, methodically, and they nearly succeeded. Will she recover physically in time? 3 broken ribs at least. The shoulder was dislocated, reset poorly. Cuts and lacerations, some infected, severe malnutrition and dehydration, but none of it fatal if she gets proper care. Chen cleaned his spectacles with a handkerchief, a habit Tom recognized as the doctor's way of processing difficult emotions. But the scars inside those take longer, maybe forever. She kept saying something, sounded like Little Star. Is that a name? Could be. Apache mothers often give children names from nature. Chen placed a hand on Tom's shoulder. Tom, she's terrified. When she wakes fully, she'll need to see kindness, not pity. Kindness. Tom looked back toward the cabin, toward the woman lying in his bed, toward the responsibility he'd taken on the moment he'd decided to lift her into his arms. Pity is for the weak. She's not weak. She survived what was meant to destroy her. That makes her stronger than most men I know. Chen nodded, satisfied. I'll come back tomorrow to check on her. For now, keep her warm, keep her hydrated. If she can take broth, that's good. And, Tom, one more thing. Yes, be patient. Trust for her is going to be the hardest medicine to swallow. After Chen left, Tom went to the kitchen and did something he hadn't done since Sarah died. He cooked. Not the simple beans and coffee that sustained him through lonely days, but actual food meant for another person. Soup, simple but hearty, with vegetables from his garden and herbs Sarah had planted that still grew wild near the porch. He worked slowly, carefully, the way Sarah had taught him, each cut of the knife deliberate. When the soup was ready, he ladled it into a ceramic bowl, placed it on a wooden tray with a clean cloth napkin, and added something he couldn't quite explain. A single wildflower, small and yellow, that grew near the creek. He didn't examine why. He just did it. Then he carried the tray toward the bedroom, stopped at the door, and knocked gently. A woman's voice, weak but alert, spoke from inside. In English, heavily accented but clear. "Who is there?" Tom opened the door, slowly, keeping his hands visible, unthreatening. "I have soup, and I'm not very good at this." He stood in the doorway, the lamplight casting his shadow long against the wall. She'd managed to sit up, her back against the headboard, the quilt pulled tight around her shoulders. Her face was still swollen, still marked with violence, but her eyes were clear, watching him with that same desperate wariness. Not good at what, Tom stepped inside, moved to set the tray on the bedside table. "Talking to people. Been alone too long. My horse is starting to ignore me." The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something almost like the memory of what smiling used to feel like. "Your horse. Yeah, Blue. She's out there judging my life choices right now." The woman studied him, this tall rancher, making jokes about his horse bringing her soup with a wildflower on the tray. Trying to understand what kind of trap this was, what he wanted, why he was being kind. "Why help me?" Tom sat down in the chair across from the bed, keeping distance between them, keeping his body language open and non-threatening. "Because you needed help. And because out here we take care of each other. Or we should." Silence stretched between them. The lamp flickered. Outside, a coyote called to the rising moon. "I'm Tom Brennan. This is my ranch." She watched him for a long moment, then made a decision. A small one, but a decision nonetheless. Ayanna Whitefeather. Tom nodded, committing the name to memory. Ayanna. That's a beautiful name. "What does it mean, eternal bloom?" She said it with a bitter edge, a dark irony that spoke volumes. "Not feeling very eternal right now. You're alive. That counts." More silence. Tom watched as she looked at the soup, at the flower at his face, making calculations, weighing risks. He waited. Patience was one thing ranch life taught well. Finally she reached for the bowl with trembling hands. Tom started to help, then stopped himself. Let her do this. Let her have this small piece of control. She managed 3 sips before exhaustion claimed her again, her hands shaking too badly to continue. This time, when Tom gently took the bowl, she didn't flinch. Rest. We can talk more tomorrow." But Ayana's hand shot out, grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes were desperate, pleading. "My daughter, Tauka Tso. In English, little star. She is 6 years old." Tom's heart dropped. The necklace. The child-sized necklace she'd been clutching. "Where is she?" Ayana's voice broke, tears streaming down her damaged face. "Fort Marcy. The Colonel. He has her. Colonel Thornhill." She nodded, her entire body beginning to shake with sobs. "He took us 3 weeks ago. He did things, terrible things. I escaped, but I had to leave her." Her voice rose, became almost a wail. "I had to leave my baby." Tom knelt beside the bed, close, but not touching, his voice low and steady. "Then we get her back." Ayana looked at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. "You don't understand. He is powerful. He has soldiers. He has judges in his pocket. He has everything. I don't care who he is. You're a mother. She's your child. That's all I need to know." "Why?" The question came out raw, broken. "Why would you risk everything for people you don't know?" Tom thought about Sarah, about the promises he'd made at her graveside, about the man he'd been trying to be for 3 years of loneliness, about the simple fact that some things were worth fighting for, whether you knew the people or not. Because if good men do nothing, evil men win, and I'm tired of watching them win. Ayana stared at him, searching his face for the lie, for the angle, for the moment when kindness would transform into cruelty. But she found only truth, only determination, only a kind of stubborn decency that she'd thought had died with her husband. "You truly mean this, I do, but I'll need your help. You know the fort, you know him. We do this smart together." Something shifted in Ayana's eyes. Not hope, not yet. But the possibility of hope, the tiny seed of maybe. She nodded slowly. "Can you draw a map of the fort?" Ayana sat up straighter, and Tom saw it. The moment she stopped being just a victim and became something else. A partner, a fighter, someone with agency. "Yes, I remember everything, every room, every guard post." Tom fetched paper and charcoal from his desk, handed them to her, and watched as she began to draw. Her hands shook at first, then steadied. The map took shape with remarkable detail. Walls, gates, barracks, all precisely rendered from memory. She marked an X on the western wing's 2nd floor. Children's barracks. This is where they keep the Apache children before sending them away to the schools. Her voice hardened on the last word, filling it with all the poison it deserved. Tom studied the map, already calculating angles, distances, vulnerabilities. "You have a good memory." Ayana's smile was dark. "When your life depends on knowing every exit you remember." They talked for another hour, Ayana providing details while Tom made notes. Guard rotations. Thornhill's habits, the layout of the fort. She was sharp, observant, her intelligence obvious despite her trauma, or perhaps because of it. Survival had honed her mind into a weapon. Finally, exhaustion claimed her again. Tom helped her lie back down, pulled the quilt up, and turned to leave. "Tom," he paused at the door, "thank you for not leaving me to die." Tom looked back at her, this broken woman who refused to stay, broken, this mother separated from her child, this survivor of horrors he could only imagine. "Out here a promise is all a man has, and I'm giving you mine. We'll get little Star back." He closed the door, softly walked out onto the porch, and looked up at the stars Sarah had loved. The night was clear and cold, the kind of cold that made the stars seem close enough to touch. "Well, Sarah," he thought, "I think I just promised to start a war with the most dangerous man in the territory. Hope you approve." Somewhere in the darkness, Blue nickered softly, and Tom chose to believe it was approval. The next 3 days established a rhythm. Tom tended to his ranch in the mornings, though his heart wasn't in it. His mind kept drifting to the woman in his cabin, to the child in the fort, to the promise he'd made. In the afternoons he'd return to find Ayana a little stronger, a little more present, a little more herself. Chen visited daily, changing bandages, checking for infection, monitoring her healing. The ribs would take weeks. The shoulder was improving. The external wounds were closing. But both men knew the real damage wasn't visible. On the second day, Ayanna managed to walk to the kitchen, leaning on Tom's arm, but walking nonetheless. She looked around his cabin with curious eyes, taking in the simple furniture, the books on the shelf. The photograph of a woman on the mantel. "Your wife," Tom nodded, his throat tight. "Sarah. She died 3 years ago. Fever." Ayanna studied the photograph for a long moment. She was beautiful. She was everything. They stood in silence, two people who understood loss in ways that most couldn't. On the third day, Ayanna told him her story, not all at once, but in pieces like a puzzle she was assembling for herself as much as for him. She'd been a teacher in her community, educated by missionaries who'd actually tried to help rather than convert. She'd married Nashota, a respected warrior, a good man who made her laugh. They'd had little Star, their miracle baby, after years of trying. 2 years ago, Nashota had died in a cavalry raid. Not Thornhill's men, but the pattern was the same. Soldiers who saw Apache as obstacles rather than people, who killed first and justified later. Ayanna had raised little Star alone, supported by her community, finding purpose in teaching the children, in preserving their language and stories. She'd been careful, kept her head down, tried to be invisible to the soldiers who patrolled their lands with increasing frequency. But Thornhill had noticed her anyway. The widow of a warrior. The teacher who kept Apache culture alive. She represented everything he wanted to destroy. 3 weeks ago, he'd come to her home with soldiers. He'd taken both her and little Star to Fort Marcy. He'd separated them immediately. Ayanna's voice went flat when she described what came next. Tom listened, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists, rage building like a fire in his chest. Thornhill had kept her in the basement of the fort. He'd beaten her when she refused to beg. He'd starved her to break her will. And when none of that worked, he'd done worse. She showed Tom her back. He'd seen the scars during Chen's examinations, but hadn't understood. Now he did. Burned into her skin, crude but deliberate, was the letter T, branded, like cattle. He wanted me to know I belonged to him, that I was his property. Tom had to leave the room. He walked outside into the cold morning air and stood there shaking with fury. He'd seen cruelty before. He'd seen men do terrible things. But this was different. This was systematic. This was evil. When he returned, Ayanna was crying silently, her arms wrapped around herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have told you." Tom knelt in front of her, his voice gentle, despite the rage still burning inside him. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. What he did, what they did, that's on them. Not you, never you." She looked at him with those green eyes, searching. "How did you escape? One night a guard got drunk, left my cell unlocked. I ran. I tried to find little Star first, but I didn't know where in the fort they were keeping her." Her voice broke. "I had to choose, stay and die or run and try to get help. So I ran. I climbed the wall, dropped down the other side. They chased me. I fell into a ravine, hit my head. When I woke up, I just kept running. For days. Until I couldn't run anymore. That's when I found you." She nodded. "I thought I was going to die. I'd made peace with it. But I kept thinking about little Star, about her waiting for me, wondering why I wasn't coming. A fresh wave of tears. She thinks I abandoned her." Tom reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. "Then we make sure she knows the truth. We get her back, and you tell her yourself." On the 4th day, Maria Delgado arrived. Tom heard the wagon before he saw it, the rattle of wheels on the hard-packed road that led to his ranch. He stepped onto the porch, hand near his pistol, a habit born of caution. The woman who climbed down from the wagon was in her late 30s, Mexican, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. She wore a simple dress but carried herself with the dignity of someone who'd survived and refused to be diminished by it. Tom Brennan. "That's me. I'm Maria Delgado. Dr. Chen said you might need assistance." Tom studied her, noting the basket of food she carried, the determination in her eyes. "What kind of assistance? The kind that helps women escape monsters." She walked past him into the cabin without waiting for invitation, found Ayanna in the kitchen, and immediately began speaking in rapid Spanish mixed with broken Apache. Ayanna responded surprised, but clearly relieved to have another woman present. Maria turned to Tom. "My husband died in Thornhill's jail 2 years ago. Murdered, though they called it an accident. I know what that man does, and I want to help stop him." She pulled a folded paper from her basket, handed it to Tom. "Transfer orders. 12 Apache children to Carlisle Indian School. December 12th. Tom felt his stomach drop. 3 weeks away. Ayanna had gone pale. "He told me I had time." He lied. Maria's voice was gentle but firm. They always lie. She pulled out another paper, smaller, clearly smuggled. "A woman named Dawa works at the fort. Apache does laundry. She got this out." Ayanna took the paper with shaking hands. Tom watched as she read it, watched as her face crumpled, watched as she fell to her knees with a sound that was half sob, half prayer. "What does it say?" Maria translated. "Mama, I am scared. The bad man says you left me, but I know you didn't. I know you are coming. I wait for you. I am brave like you told me. I love you. Little star." Tom's chest felt too tight. He'd never had children, had never known that particular kind of love and fear. But watching Ayanna clutch that letter like it was made of diamond and light, he understood. He understood completely. He knelt beside her, didn't touch her, just his presence. "She knows you're coming. She's waiting. And we won't let her wait long." Ayanna looked up at him through tears, and for the first time he saw something other than fear in her eyes. He saw hope. Real, fragile, dangerous hope. The three of them sat at Tom's kitchen table, the letter between them like a declaration of war, and began to plan. Maria had resources, a boarding house in Santa Fe where she housed travelers and gathered information. She knew which soldiers drank at which saloons, which ones had loose tongues, which ones had consciences. "There's a private, Jacob Murphy. Young. He's been troubled by the orders he's been given. I think he might help." Ayanna added details about the fort, about Dawa, who'd lost her own son to Thornhill's system and was desperate to help save others, about the children's barracks, about the guards' routines, about Thornhill's habits. "He keeps a ledger in his office, records everything, payments, orders, all his dealings." "Can you access his office?" Ayanna's laugh was bitter. "I was in that office many times, against my will. But yes, I know the layout. I even know the combination to his safe." Both Tom and Maria stared at her. "He made me watch when he opened it, wanted me to see what power looked like." She met their eyes. He was careless, I remembered. Tom felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about rescuing one child anymore. This was about exposing a monster, about gathering evidence, about justice. They talked for hours refining the plan. Maria would coordinate with Murphy, see if he could be recruited. Dawa would be the inside contact, the connection to the children. Ayanna would provide intelligence. And Tom would handle the logistics, the timing, the execution. "We need one more thing," Maria said. "Legal authority, someone who can't be bought." "Is there such a person?" Maria smiled. "Judge Elias Hartman. He's old, stubborn, and incorruptible, but he needs evidence. Then we get him evidence." As Maria prepared to leave, she turned to Ayanna. "You're very brave, you know, to survive what you did, to keep fighting." Ayanna shook her head. "I'm not brave. I'm just a mother who wants her daughter back." Maria's eyes were knowing. "That's what makes you brave." After Maria left, Tom and Ayanna sat on the porch as the sun set. It had become their routine, these quiet moments at day's end. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just existed In the same space, two damaged people finding unexpected comfort in shared silence. Tom. Yeah, I want to ask you something. Ask. Your wife, Sarah. What was she like? Tom was quiet for a long moment, surprised by the question, surprised that talking about Sarah didn't hurt quite as much as it used to. School teacher, smartest person I ever met. She could quote Shakespeare and rope a calf in the same afternoon. He smiled at the memory. Fever took her 3 years ago. Sometimes I still talk to her, out loud. Probably makes me crazy. Ayana's voice was soft. I talked to Nashota too. Maybe we are both crazy. They shared a small laugh, the first real one Tom had heard from her. It was brief, tentative, but real. You loved her very much. Still do. Loving someone doesn't stop just because they're gone. It just changes shape, becomes memory instead of presence. Ayana nodded, understanding in her eyes. Nashota used to say something similar. He said the ones we love become stars, watching over us, guiding us home. Tom looked up at the emerging stars, at the vast New Mexico sky that Sarah had loved. Then we've got a whole sky full of guardians. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell. Two people bound by loss and purpose, by promises made to the living and the dead. On the 5th day, everything changed. Tom was in the barn tending to Blue when he heard the horses, multiple riders approaching fast. He grabbed his rifle, stepped out into the sunlight, and saw 2 cavalry soldiers from Fort Marcy riding up to his cabin. His heart hammered. Had they found her? Had someone talked? The lead rider was a sergeant, maybe 40 years old, with a scar running down his left cheek and eyes that had seen too much. His companion was younger, nervous. Tom stepped forward, rifle held casually but ready. Help you gentlemen with something? The sergeant dismounted, his hand near his pistol but not on it. Morning, sir. I'm Sergeant William Hastings. We're looking for a fugitive. Apache woman escaped from lawful custody at Fort Marcy 3 weeks ago. Tom kept his face carefully neutral. Haven't seen any Apache women. Just me and my cattle out here. Hastings studied him clearly, not convinced. Mind if we look around? I do mind, actually. This is private property. You got a warrant? The younger soldier bristled, but Hastings held up a hand. No warrant, just following orders. Well, when you get that warrant, you come back. Until then, I'd appreciate you leaving my land. Hastings didn't move his eyes, scanning the cabin, the barn, looking for any sign. Colonel Thornhill is very interested in finding this woman. She's dangerous, unstable. Tom's grip tightened on the rifle. Is that what he told you? That's what the report says. Tom made a decision. A risky one, but necessary. Sergeant, let me ask you something. You got a family? Hastings' face flickered with something. Pain, conflict, a daughter. Why? Because I'm trying to understand what kind of man follows orders to hunt down a woman who's already been to hell and back. Hastings' jaw clenched. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Or maybe I know exactly what I'm talking about, and that's what bothers you. The two men stared at each other, a silent battle of wills and conscience. Finally, Hastings remounted his horse. If you do see her, you're required by law to report it. Failure to do so makes you an accessory. Tom didn't blink. I'll keep that in mind. Hastings turned his horse, then paused. Brennan, a word of advice. Thornhill doesn't like interference, and he doesn't forgive. Tom met his eyes. Neither do I. The soldiers rode away, dust rising behind them. Tom waited until they were out of sight, then hurried inside. Ayana stood in the corner of the kitchen, having heard everything, her face pale with terror. He knows. He knows I'm here. Tom set the rifle down, moved toward her slowly. He suspects. But he doesn't know, not for certain. Her breathing was ragged panic setting in. You should turn me in, before he comes back, before he hurts you too. Tom's voice was firm. That's not happening. Tom, you don't understand what he's capable of. Then help me understand. Tell me everything, who he is, what he wants, why he's doing this. Ayana sank into a chair, her hands trembling. It's not just about me, or Little Star. It's bigger than that. She took a shaky breath. Thornhill wants our land, all the Apache lands. There's a railroad coming Southern Pacific. They want to build through our territory. But they can't while we're there. Tom's mind raced, pieces clicking into place. So he's trying to remove you, legally. Ayanna nodded. The Indian schools. If he can prove we're unfit parents, dangerous, unable to care for our own children, the government will take them. Send them to schools far away, where they'll forget our language, our culture, and without our children, our communities will die. The land will be declared abandoned. Thornhill gets his railroad contracts, gets rich, and we disappear. How many families has he done this to? Her voice was hollow. Many, 15, 20. He targets families of warriors first. Anyone who might resist. Then teachers. Anyone who keeps our culture alive. Tom felt sick. This wasn't just cruelty. This was genocide through bureaucracy, evil dressed in official paperwork and government orders. And the children he takes. Some are sent to schools, some die there, some are never seen again. Her eyes met his, desperate. That's why I have to get little Star back, not just because she's my daughter, because if I don't, she'll disappear. Her name will be changed, her hair will be cut, she'll be beaten for speaking Apache. And in 10 years, even if I found her, she wouldn't remember me. Tom grabbed his hat, his coat. Where are you going to town? To talk to everyone Maria mentioned, to get more allies, because you're right. This is bigger than one child. And if we're going to fight Thornhill, we're going to need an army. Ayanna stood blocking his path. Tom, if you do this, there's no going back. He'll destroy you. Your ranch, your reputation, maybe your life. Tom thought about Sarah, about the promises he'd made to be a better man, about the simple fact that evil thrived when good people chose comfort over courage. Then I guess I'm going to war. Out here, a promise is all a man has, and I'm keeping mine. The morning sun rose over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painting the high desert in shades of amber and rose. Tom stood on his porch, coffee growing cold in his tin cup, watching Ayanna move through the chicken coop with increasing confidence. 2 weeks had passed since the soldiers had come to his ranch, 2 weeks since Hastings had stood in his yard asking questions Tom had carefully deflected. 2 weeks of careful preparation, of building trust, of transforming a rescue mission into something far more significant. Ayanna emerged from the coop with a basket of eggs, her movement still careful around her healing ribs, but no longer pained. At 29, she possessed a resilience that belied the trauma she'd endured. She'd regained some weight, the hollow gauntness replaced by healthy curves. Her hair, once matted with blood and dirt, now hung in a thick braid down her back, gleaming black in the morning light. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow shadows, and though she still bore scars that would never fully disappear, she carried herself with growing strength. She caught him watching and smiled a real smile that reached her eyes. Those moments were becoming more frequent small victories in the larger war of healing. "Good morning, Tom Brennan. Your chickens are judgmental creatures." Tom laughed, the sound coming easier now than it had in 3 years. "That's because you spoil them. They expect the fancy treatment now." She climbed the porch steps, set the basket down, and accepted the coffee he poured for her. They stood side by side, looking out over the ranch as steam rose from their cups. This, too, had become a ritual, these quiet morning moments before the day's work began. "Tell me something. Anything." What was Sarah's favorite time of day? Tom considered the question, surprised by how much it didn't hurt to think about her anymore. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had softened into something bearable. Dawn. She said it was the world's promise that everything could begin again. No matter how bad yesterday was, dawn came and gave you another chance. Ayanna nodded slowly. Nashota loved sunset. He said it was the earth's way of showing gratitude for another day of life. The colors were the Creator's celebration, different perspectives on the same sun. Yes, but both beautiful, both true. They sipped their coffee in companionable silence. two people learning that loving someone who died didn't mean you couldn't find connection with someone living, that honoring the past didn't require abandoning the future. Inside the cabin, the talking stick Running Deer had sent sat on the mantel next to Sarah's photograph. Tom had found Ayanna standing before both one evening, her fingers touching the carved wood, her eyes on Sarah's face. "She would have liked you," he'd said from the doorway. Ayanna had turned tears on her cheeks, but smiling. "I think I would have liked her too. She chose well when she chose you." Now in the growing morning light, Ayanna set down her coffee cup and pulled a piece of cloth from her pocket. She'd been working on it for days, small careful stitches forming a pattern Tom didn't recognize. "What is that A shirt?" "For Little Star. For when I see her again. Not if. When." The certainty in her voice had grown stronger each day. "Tell me about her. What does she like? What makes her laugh?" Ayanna's face transformed, joy and pain mixing in equal measure. She loved stories. Every night Nashota would tell her tales of Coyote the Trickster, of how the stars came to be, of brave warriors and clever grandmothers. She'd beg for one more, just one more, until her eyes couldn't stay open. Tom smiled, imagining it. "After he died, I continued the tradition. Sometimes I would change the stories, make them about a little girl who was brave like a warrior, smart like a grandmother. She would say, 'Mama, that girl is me.' And I would say, 'Yes, baby, that girl is exactly you.'" Her voice caught. "I wonder if she still remembers the stories. If she tells them to herself in that barracks in the dark. She remembers. And she's telling herself the biggest story of all, the one where her mama comes to rescue her." Ayanna looked at him, those green eyes searching his face. "You have such faith. In me. In this plan. How?" "Because I've watched you heal. Not just your body, but your spirit. 3 weeks ago you could barely stand. Now you're planning a raid on a military fort. That's not weakness, Ayanna. That's strength I can barely comprehend." She reached out, took his hand. The gesture was becoming less rare, small touches that spoke of growing trust, of barriers carefully lowered. "I'm still afraid. Every day. Every night. I dream of her calling for me, and I can't reach her. Fear doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Brave people aren't fearless. They're just people who act despite the fear." Nashota used to say something similar. She squeezed his hand once, then released it, picked up the egg basket. "Come, I'll make breakfast. You need to eat before you turn into a scarecrow." Tom followed her inside, marveling at how much had changed in such a short time. His cabin, once a monument to loneliness, now felt alive. Ayanna had brought more than her presence. She'd brought purpose. She moved around his kitchen with practiced ease, now preparing breakfast with ingredients she'd taught him to appreciate. Fry bread that melted in your mouth. Eggs scrambled with wild onions she'd found growing near the creek. Coffee strong enough to wake the dead, the way she said Nashota had liked it. They ate together at the small wooden table, and Tom found himself talking about things he'd kept locked away for years. His childhood on a hardscrabble farm in Missouri, his father's drinking, his mother's quiet strength. How he'd left at 16 with nothing but a bedroll and determination, worked his way west through a dozen ranches, learning everything he could about cattle and horses and the hard business of survival. Sarah had been the first person to see past the rough exterior, to recognize that beneath the calluses and the careful distance was someone who wanted to build something good, something lasting. She'd believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. She sounds like Nashota in some ways. He saw the best in people even when they didn't deserve it. "Did you deserve it?" Ayanna paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "I don't know. I was young when we married. Barely 20. I thought I knew everything. He was patient with my arrogance, my certainty that my way was always right." She smiled at the memory. He would let me argue myself in circles, then quietly suggest another perspective. Never telling me I was wrong, just showing me there were other ways to see things. Sounds like a wise man. He was, but also silly. He could make little Star laugh until she couldn't breathe doing these ridiculous dances, making faces like a deranged owl. Tom found himself laughing at the image. I would have liked to meet him. He would have liked you. Probably would have challenged you to a horse race. He was very competitive about his riding skills. Would he have won? Ayanna's grin was mischievous. Against you? Definitely. Tom clutched his chest in mock offense. Wounded. I'm wounded. The laughter felt good, felt normal, felt like proof that joy could exist even in the shadow of terrible things. They cleaned up breakfast together, working in comfortable synchronization, and Tom realized this was what he'd missed most after Sarah died. Not the grand romantic gestures, but this. The simple dailiness of sharing space with someone who understood you. Around mid-morning, Tom took Ayanna out to teach her more about the ranch. She was a quick study, absorbing information with the same sharp intelligence she'd shown when drawing the fort map. He showed her how to check the fence lines for damage, how to read cattle behavior to spot sickness early, how to distinguish between the track of a coyote and a wolf. Why do I need to know these things? Tom paused in his examination of a fence post. Because knowledge is power. Because if something happens to me, you need to be able to manage. And because I think you like learning, she smiled. I do. Teaching was my calling before all this. I taught reading, writing, mathematics. Some parents didn't want their daughters educated, thought it would make them unmarriageable. But I convinced them that smart women make strong communities. You were a teacher. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes, I loved it, watching children's faces when understanding finally clicked, when the letters stopped being meaningless marks and became word stories, power. Her expression dimmed. The Indian schools they teach too, but they teach shame. They teach children that everything about them, their language, their culture, their very being is wrong. They break spirits in the name of civilization. Tom felt anger rise in his chest, hot and righteous. We're not going to let little Star go to one of those places. I promise you that. I know. I believe you. They worked together through the afternoon, and Tom found himself teaching her things Sarah had once taught him. How to splint a calf's broken leg, how to predict weather from cloud formations, how to find north by the stars. Practical skills that out here could mean the difference between life and death. As the sun began its descent, they returned to the cabin to find a visitor waiting. Doctor. Chen sat on the porch, his medical bag beside him, smoking a thin cigar and looking contemplative. Tom. Ayanna. Good you're both here. Doc. Everything all right? Chen stubbed out his cigar, stood. I need to examine Ayanna one more time, make sure everything's healing properly, but I also have news. They went inside. While Chen examined Ayanna in the bedroom, Tom paced the main room, restless with anticipation. When they emerged, Chen's expression was cautiously optimistic. Physically, you're healing remarkably well. The ribs are mending, the shoulder has regained most of its range of motion. The lacerations are closed and showing no signs of infection. He paused. The brand will scar. I can try to minimize it with certain ointments, but it will always be visible. Ayanna's hand moved unconsciously to her back. I don't need it hidden. I need it transformed. Transformed, she looked at Tom. I told Tom I want to cover it with Apache tattooing, turn Thornhill's mark of ownership into a symbol of survival. A butterfly, maybe. Transformation. Rising from destruction. Chen nodded slowly. That's actually quite psychologically healthy. Reclaiming your body, rewriting the narrative on your own terms. He turned to Tom. The news I mentioned. Judge Hartman wants to meet with you both. Tomorrow, if possible. He's been gathering information about Thornhill, about the children, about the broader pattern of abuse. He thinks he might have a path forward legally. What kind of path? Federal oversight. There are people in Washington who are starting to ask questions about territorial Indian policy. If we can provide enough evidence, enough testimony, Hartman believes he can get federal inspectors sent here. How long would that take? Weeks? Maybe a month? Ayanna shook her head. We don't have weeks. The children are being transferred December 12th. That's 3 weeks from now. I know. But if we can delay that transfer, if we can create enough public pressure, enough legal complications, we might be able to hold it off until the inspectors arrive. How do we create that kind of pressure? Chen smiled. That's what you'll discuss with Hartman tomorrow. But I'll tell you this much, it involves making a lot of noise in a very public way. After Chen left, Tom and Ayanna sat by the fire contemplating this new development. The plan was evolving, growing beyond a simple rescue into something larger, something that might actually change the system rather than just saving 12 children from it. Tom. Do you ever regret this, getting involved in something so complicated? Tom looked at her at the firelight, playing across her face at the determination in her eyes. Every relationship is complicated, Ayanna. Marriage is complicated, friendship is complicated. The only uncomplicated thing is being alone, and that's just another word for being half alive. Is that what you were before half alive? He thought about the 3 years after Sarah died, the endless days of going through motions of existing without really living. Yeah, I was. You woke me up. This situation, these stakes you. You reminded me what it feels like to care about something more than just making it to tomorrow. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand it clearly so there's no confusion. All right, I'm grateful to you, more grateful than I can express. You saved my life. You're helping me save my daughter. You've given me hope when I had none. I hear a but coming. She smiled slightly. But I'm not ready for anything more than this. Than friendship, partnership, whatever we want to call it. Nashota has only been gone 2 years. Little Star is my only priority. And I've been through things that make it hard to trust, hard to open up in certain ways. Tom reached across the space between their chairs, offered his hand. She took it. I'm not asking for anything more. I'm just grateful to know you, to be part of this. Whatever we are, whatever we might become someday, that's for someday. Right now, we're 2 people trying to do the right thing. That's enough. She squeezed his hand, relief visible in her expression. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for being honest. They sat like that, hands linked, staring into the fire until the logs burned down to embers and the night grew cold. Then Ayanna stood stretched and headed toward the bedroom. At the doorway, she paused. Tom? Yeah, in another life. In other circumstances, I think we could have been something beautiful. We still can be. Just not yet. And that's okay. She smiled soft and genuine and disappeared into the room. Tom sat alone for another hour, stoking the fire, thinking about patience and timing and the strange ways life brought people together. He pulled out Sarah's photograph, studied her face in the firelight. I think you'd approve, he whispered. I think you sent her to me for exactly this, to wake me up, to give me purpose again. Thank you. He could almost hear Sarah's laugh, feel her approval, as if the distance between the living and the dead was thinner than people believed. The next day they rode to Santa Fe together, the talking stick wrapped carefully and secured to Ayanna's saddle. The town was bigger than Tom remembered, growing rapidly, with new buildings going up on every corner. Progress, people called it. Though Tom wasn't sure progress was the right word for expansion that displaced people who'd been here for generations. Judge Elias Hartman's office was in the courthouse, an imposing brick building that dominated the town square. The judge himself was in his early 60s, with white hair, sharp blue eyes, and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades watching people lie to him and had gotten very good at spotting it. Mr. Brennan, Mrs. Whitefeather, please sit. His office was lined with law books, the desk covered in neat stacks of papers. Hartman gestured to 2 chairs facing his desk, then settled into his own seat with the slight grimace of someone whose back had seen better days. Dr. Chen has told me about your situation. I've also done my own investigation into Colonel Thornhill's activities. What I've found is deeply disturbing. He pulled a folder from his desk, opened it. In the past 2 years, 47 Apache families have had their children removed to Indian schools. 15 of those families had their land seized shortly afterward, claimed as abandoned. The land was then sold quietly to railroad interests, Southern Pacific primarily. Tom felt his jaw tighten. Thornhill is profiting from this. Not directly, he's too smart for that. But people in his command structure are receiving payments. His second-in-command just bought a house in Denver that costs more than his salary for the next 10 years. So we expose them, bring charges. Hartman sighed. It's not that simple. Thornhill has friends, powerful friends. 3 congressmen, at least 2 senators, and several territorial officials. They protect him because he's useful to them. He removes Indians from land they want. Does it in a way that looks legal on paper, and everyone profits. There has to be something we can do. There is. But it requires perfect timing, ironclad evidence, and a level of public pressure that makes it impossible for his friends to protect him without destroying their own careers. The judge leaned forward. Here's what I propose. We need 3 things. First, documentary evidence of his crimes, orders, financial records, anything that proves illegal activity. Second, testimony from witnesses, multiple witnesses, all telling the same story. Third, federal oversight before he can make this problem disappear. We don't have the first one. The ledger is in his safe. Hartman's eyes gleamed. Then we need someone to get it. Tom glanced at Ayanna. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, but he could see her mind working. I know the combination to his safe. Both men looked at her. How Ayanna's voice was flat controlled. He made me watch. When he opened it, he wanted me to see how much power he had, how many important people he owned. He was showing off. He didn't think I'd remember. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. He underestimated me. Hartman nodded slowly. If we could get that ledger, combine it with testimony from the families he's destroyed, create a public outcry loud enough that Washington has to pay attention, we might have a chance. How do we create that kind of outcry? The judge stood, walked to his window overlooking the square. There's a territorial council meeting in 2 weeks. Public forum. Anyone can speak. If we had a dozen Apache mothers stand up, name their stolen children, describe what happened to them, with the territorial press present, with witnesses from the community, it would be impossible to ignore. And if Thornhill just dismisses it, calls them liars, that's where the ledger comes in. Hard evidence to back up the testimony. Between the two, we create a scandal big enough that federal investigators have to be sent. Tom's mind was already working through the logistics. We need to coordinate the retrieval of the ledger with the council meeting. Time it so Thornhill can't suppress the evidence before it goes public. Exactly. But retrieving that ledger means infiltrating the fort, breaking into Thornhill's office. That's military property. If you're caught, it's a federal crime. Tom looked at Ayanna. She met his eyes, and he saw the same determination he felt. We're willing to take that risk. Hartman studied them both for a long moment. All right, let's plan this carefully, because we only get one chance. If we fail, Thornhill will be even more protected. He'll paint himself as the victim of a conspiracy, and those children will be gone forever. They spent the next 2 hours mapping out a strategy. Maria Delgado joined them partway through, bringing news that she'd made contact with Private Murphy. The young soldier was willing to help despite the enormous risk to his career and freedom. As the meeting broke up, Hartman walked them to the door. Mrs. Whitefeather, may I ask you something personal? Ayanna nodded. Why are you doing this? You could take your daughter and disappear. Start over somewhere new. Why risk everything to fight a system that's never shown you anything but cruelty? Ayanna was quiet for a moment, then unwrapped the talking stick, held it up. Elder Running Deer gave me this, made me the voice for our people in this matter. But even before that, I would have fought. Because Little Star deserves to grow up knowing who she is, because other mothers deserve to have their children back, because silence in the face of evil is the same as approval. She met his eyes. My husband died fighting for our people. If I do nothing, his death meant nothing. If I fight, even if I fail, at least I honored his memory. At least I tried. Hartman's eyes were suspiciously bright. Your husband was a lucky man, and your daughter is lucky to have you as a mother. As they rode back toward the ranch, the sun setting behind them, Tom couldn't stop thinking about Ayanna's words, about the courage it took to keep fighting when you'd already been broken, about the strength required to choose hope over despair. "You're thinking very loudly over there," Tom smiled. "Just thinking about what you said, about fighting, even if you might fail. And I'm realizing that's what love is, what real love looks like. Fighting for someone even when the odds are impossible. Staying when leaving would be easier, choosing them over and over, no matter the cost." "You're talking about Sarah." Tom glanced at her. "Actually, I was talking about you, what you're doing for Little Star. But yeah, it applies to Sarah too. And to Nashota. We've all loved people worth fighting for." Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you. For what? For seeing it that way. For understanding that fighting for my daughter isn't weakness or desperation. It's love. It's the strongest thing I've ever seen." They rode in silence as the stars began to emerge one by one, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Little Star was looking at those same stars waiting for her mother. And Ayanna was riding toward her, unstoppable as the turning of the earth itself. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous-looking courier who refused to meet Tom's eyes. Inside was a single sheet of paper unsigned, written in careful block letters. "Transfer moved to December 8th. Thornhill suspects interference. Time is short." Tom's blood ran cold. They'd lost 5 days. 5 precious days they'd been counting on for preparation and coordination. He found Ayanna in the garden behind the cabin tending the small herb plot she'd started. She looked up as he approached, saw his face, and immediately stood. "What's wrong?" He handed her the note. Her hands shook as she read it, her face going pale. No, we're not ready. The plan was for the 12th. Plans change. We adapt." He tried to sound confident, but inside he was scrambling. Everything they'd carefully orchestrated, all the timing, the coordination with Judge Hartman, the gathering of witnesses, it all depended on having those extra days. Ayanna sank onto the garden bench, the paper crumpling in her fist. "I'm going to lose her. After everything, I'm going to lose her." Tom knelt in front of her, took her hands. Look at me, Ayanna." She raised her eyes, and he saw the fear there, the bone-deep terror of a mother facing the loss of her child. "We're not giving up. We move the timeline up. We call in every favor, we push harder, we do whatever it takes. But we don't quit." How do we compress weeks of planning into days? The same way you survived what Thornhill did to you, one step at a time, one decision at a time, one breath at a time. She searched his face, looking for certainty he wasn't sure he felt. But he kept his expression steady, let her see his determination, even if confidence eluded him. Before she could respond, the sound of multiple horses approaching made them both turn. Tom's hand went to his pistol, but he relaxed when he recognized Maria's wagon in the lead. Behind her rode a dozen Apache warriors, and bringing up the rear, looking profoundly uncomfortable, was Sergeant William Hastings, out of uniform. Tom and Ayanna met them in the yard. Maria climbed down from her wagon, her expression grim but determined. "We heard about the date change. The entire territory is talking about it. Thornhill's getting nervous rushing things." One of the Apache riders dismounted a man in his 40s with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. He approached Ayanna, speaking in rapid Apache. Tom caught enough to understand he was asking about Little Star, about the plan, about whether they were still going forward. Ayanna responded in Apache, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. Tom didn't need to understand every word to grasp the meaning. They were going forward. They weren't backing down. They were fighting for their children no matter the odds. The warrior clasped her shoulder, said something that made her eyes fill with tears, then remounted. The group of riders turned and headed back the way they'd come, except for one young man who stayed behind. "This is my nephew Carlos. He'll ride with you. He knows the fort knows the schedules. He can help." Tom nodded his thanks, then turned to Hastings. The sergeant looked like he hadn't slept in days, dark circles under his eyes, his face drawn with stress. "Hastings, what are you doing here?" The sergeant dismounted slowly, removed his hat. "I need to talk to you, all of you, about the fort, about Thornhill, about my daughter." They gathered inside the cabin, the space suddenly crowded with bodies and tension. Maria poured coffee while Tom lit extra lamps. When everyone was settled, Hastings began to speak. "My daughter's name is Walks in Rain. She's 8 years old. Her mother was Apache, died giving birth to her. I've raised her. Alone tried to give her the best of both worlds. Taught her English and Apache. Took her to church and to tribal ceremonies." He stared into his coffee cup. "Last month, Thornhill found out. I don't know how someone must have talked. He called me into his office, very friendly, very casual, asked about my family, and then he said, 'It would be a shame if that half-breed daughter of yours ended up in one of those schools. I hear they're very strict. Children sometimes don't survive the discipline.'" Ayanna made a sound quickly suppressed. He said it smiling, like he was discussing the weather. "Then he told me that as long as I followed orders, no questions asked, my daughter would be safe. But if I showed any reluctance, any conscience, she'd be on the next train east." "Where is she now?" Tom asked quietly. "In the children's barracks, with Little Star and the others. Room on the second floor west wing." Ayanna leaned forward. "Is she okay? Is she being treated well?" Hastings finally met her eyes. "As well as any of them, which is to say, not well at all. They're fed enough to survive given basic medical care, but they're prisoners. Thornhill keeps them as leverage against their families, against anyone who might resist." Maria set down her cup with a sharp click. "Then we get them all out. Not just Little Star, all of them." Hastings nodded slowly. "That's why I'm here. I can't do this alone, but I can help you. I know the fort layout, the guard rotations, the weak points in security. I have access to keys to information. Why should we trust you?" Ayanna's voice was hard. "You've been complicit in this. You've stood by while children were stolen, while families were destroyed." Hastings flinched, but didn't look away. "You're right, I have. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that right. But right now my daughter is in danger. And so is yours. So are 10 other children. I can help save them. That's all I'm offering." Tom studied the sergeant, weighing truth against potential deception. Finally he made a decision. "All right, you're in. But if this is a trap, if you betray us, there won't be anywhere you can hide." "Understood." They spread a map of Fort Marcy on the table, and Hastings began marking locations, explaining routines, identifying vulnerabilities. The fort had been built 20 years earlier, designed more for show than serious defense. The walls were imposing but poorly maintained. Guard rotations were predictable, following the same patterns week after week. Most of the soldiers are good men. They joined to serve their country, not to terrorize civilians. If they knew what Thornhill was really doing, many would refuse to follow orders. Then we tell them, we expose him to his own troops. How the ledger. If we can get it, show them proof of the corruption, the illegal orders, we split his support. Maybe prevent violence entirely. Hastings shook his head. Getting the ledger means breaking into his office. That's in the center of the fort, second floor of the command building. It's always guarded, unless we create a distraction. Everyone turned to look at Carlos, who'd been silent until now. The young Apache man leaned forward. "Fire. Start a fire in the stables. Not big enough to really damage anything, but enough to pull guards away. Everyone responds to fire." Tom nodded slowly. "That could work, but we'd need perfect timing. Get the ledger, get the children, get out, before they realize what's really happening." Maria pulled out a calendar, began marking dates. "December 8th is 6 days away. That gives us time to coordinate, but not much. We need everyone in position and ready." They spent the next hours hammering out details. Carlos would infiltrate the fort 3 days early, posing as a laborer, helping with construction on the new barracks. He'd scout current conditions, confirm guard patterns, and prepare the distraction. Hastings would work from inside, getting keys copied, identifying which soldiers could be trusted, creating opportunities for the plan to succeed. Maria would coordinate with Judge Hartman, make sure the legal side was ready to move the moment they had evidence. And Tom and Ayanna would handle the actual infiltration and rescue. There's one more thing we need. Everyone looked at Ayanna. We need Private Murphy. He works in the command building. He has access to areas we don't. Hastings nodded. I can bring him here, tomorrow night. He's a good kid, troubled by what he's seen. I think he'll help. The meeting broke up near midnight, everyone exhausted, but energized. As the others prepared to leave, Hastings approached Ayanna. Mrs. Whitefeather, I want you to know something. What was done to you, what I allowed to happen by not stopping it, that's on me. I can't undo it. But I can make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Ayanna regarded him for a long moment. Your words mean nothing to me. Your actions will prove whether you're worthy of forgiveness. Save the children, including your own daughter, and maybe we can talk about redemption. Fair enough. After everyone left, Tom found Ayanna standing on the porch staring at the stars. He joined her, keeping a respectful distance. You did good in there, strong, clear, like a general planning a campaign. She smiled slightly. Nashota used to say I was bossy. I prefer to think of it as knowing what needs to happen and making sure it does. Nothing wrong with that. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the night air cold and clean. Tom, if this goes wrong, if I don't make it out, don't. No, listen. If I don't make it, promise me you'll still get Little Star. Get her to running dear to my people. Make sure she knows I died trying to save her, not because I abandoned her. Tom turned to face her fully. You're going to make it out. We both are, along with your daughter and every other child in that place. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to make it happen. And I can promise that if something happens to you, Little Star will know her mother was the bravest person I ever met. Ayanna's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I'm so afraid, not of dying, of failing her again. Tom reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and pulled her into a gentle embrace. She stiffened for just a moment, then relaxed against him, letting herself be held. You haven't failed her. You escaped impossible odds. You survived. You built an army of people willing to fight for her. That's not failure, Ayanna. That's love in its purest form. She pulled back after a moment, wiping her eyes. Thank you for everything, for being the man you are. She went inside, leaving Tom alone with the stars and his thoughts. He stayed there for another hour, planning, worrying, praying to a God he wasn't sure existed that they'd all make it through the next week alive. The following evening, Private Jacob Murphy arrived as promised. He was younger than Tom expected, maybe 25, with a baby face that couldn't hide the trouble in his eyes. He rode in with Hastings, both in civilian clothes, both looking over their shoulders like hunted men. Inside the cabin, Murphy sat nervously, hands twisting his hat into a shapeless mass. Maria poured coffee he didn't drink. Ayanna watched him with the wariness of someone who'd learned that uniforms didn't automatically mean trustworthy. Tell us what you know, Murphy. The young private took a shaky breath. I know that everything we've been told about the Apache is a lie, that the raids Thornhill claims they're conducting are fabricated, that the children in those barracks are there illegally taken from their families without proper cause or documentation. How do you know this? Because I've seen the real reports, the ones Thornhill files versus the ones he actually writes. I work in the administrative office. I file paperwork, and I started noticing discrepancies months ago. What kind of discrepancies? Official reports say Apache families voluntarily surrendered their children to Indian schools. The real records, the ones Thornhill keeps locked up, they tell a different story. Forced removals, families threatened, women assaulted. He looked at Ayanna. I read your file, ma'am. What they officially recorded versus what actually happened. The official version says you attacked soldiers and were subdued with appropriate force. The real notes, they're sickening. Ayanna's face was stone, but Tom saw her hands tremble. "Why didn't you report this to who Thornhill's commanding officer is in his pocket?" "The territorial governor receives payments from the railroad. Everyone who should care is profiting from the lie." Murphy finally looked up, met their eyes. "But there are federal investigators. Real ones, not local politicians. They're asking questions about irregularities in territorial Indian policy. If we can get evidence to them before Thornhill destroys it, before he moves those children, we might have a chance." "How do we do that?" "The ledger? It's all in the ledger. Every bribe, every illegal order, every piece of land stolen. Get that to Judge Hartman. Get it to the federal investigators, and Thornhill's done." Tom leaned forward. "Can you get into his office?" Murphy nodded slowly. "I've been making copies of keys for weeks. I have one that fits his office door. The safe, though, that's a different problem. I don't have the combination." Ayanna spoke up. 1876-32. Everyone turned to stare at her. "How do you know that?" She held Murphy's gaze steadily. "Because he made me watch him open it, multiple times. He wanted me to see how much power he had, how untouchable he was. He thought I was too broken to remember, too defeated to matter." Her voice hardened. He was wrong. Murphy let out a long breath. "Then we can do this. We can actually do this." They refined the plan over the next several hours. Murphy would enter Thornhill's office during the distraction Carlos created. He'd have maybe 10 minutes to get in, open the safe, grab the ledger, and get out. Hastings would run interference, keeping other soldiers away, creating alibis. Meanwhile, Tom and Ayanna would use the chaos to reach the children's barracks. Maria would be waiting outside the fort with a wagon ready to transport everyone to safety. It's risky. So many things could go wrong. Tom looked at each person in the room. "I won't lie to you. This is dangerous. We could all end up in prison or dead. But those children, they're running out of time. We're their last chance." He turned to Ayanna. "And we're not just doing this for them. We're doing it to expose a system that's rotten to its core. To make sure what happened to Ayanna, to all those families, can't happen again." Murphy stood. "I'm in. All the way." Hastings nodded. "So am I." Carlos, who'd been quiet throughout, spoke up. "My people are ready. When you need us, we'll be there." Maria raised her coffee cup to justice and to getting those babies home. They all raised their cups, a makeshift toast to an impossible mission. After the others left, only Tom, Ayanna, and Maria remained. They sat around the table, the weight of what they were planning settling over them like a heavy blanket. "You know there's a good chance we don't all make it out." Maria's voice was matter-of-fact, not fearful. Ayanna nodded. "I know, but I'd rather die trying than live knowing I didn't." Tom thought about Sarah, about the promises he'd made at her graveside. To live fully, to fight for what mattered, to be worthy of the love she'd given him. Then we go in with eyes open. We accept the risks, and we do everything we can to make sure we all walk out alive. Maria stood stretched. "I should go. Need to coordinate with Hartman, make sure the legal side is ready." After she left, Tom and Ayanna sat in the firelight, neither speaking, both lost in thought. Finally, Ayanna broke the silence. "Tell me something good, something that has nothing to do with any of this." Tom thought for a moment. "When I was 12, my mother took me to a traveling circus, first one I'd ever seen. There was this man who could juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle. I was convinced it was the most amazing thing I'd ever witnessed. Did you try to learn? I tried to juggle. Set the barn on fire." My father was not amused. Ayanna laughed, a real laugh that lit up her whole face. "What did he do? Made me rebuild it. Spent the whole summer cutting timber, hammering nails, learning about fire safety. Best lesson he ever taught me. You break something, you fix it. You don't run away from consequences." "Is that what you're doing now, fixing something?" Tom considered that. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to be the kind of person who doesn't walk past someone in need. Sarah used to say the world was full of people waiting for someone else to act. She refused to be one of them. She sounds like she was an exceptional woman. She was. And you know what, I think she'd really like you. You're both fighters. Both refuse to accept injustice quietly." Ayanna's smile was sad. "I wish I could have met her." Tom looked at Sarah's photograph on the mantel. "In a way, you have. Everything I'm doing, everything I'm trying to be, that's her influence. She's still shaping my choices, even though she's been gone 3 years. Nashota is the same for me. He taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear. He was terrified every time he rode out to defend our people. But he went anyway, because it mattered more than his fear." Exactly. They sat together as the fire burned low, two people held together by grief and purpose, by the memory of those they'd loved, and the determination to honor them through action. The next morning, Tom woke to find Ayanna already up sitting at the table with papers spread before her. She was writing something, her hand moving across the page with careful deliberation. "What's that, a letter? To little Star, in case I don't make it." Tom's heart clenched. "Ayanna," she held up a hand, "I need to do this. Need to tell her everything I want her to know, about her father, about our people, about who she is and where she comes from. If I die before I can tell her in person, at least she'll have this." Tom sat across from her, watched her write. After a moment, he pulled out his own paper and began to write. A letter to Ayanna to be read only if he didn't survive. Telling her things he hadn't quite found the courage to say aloud. They wrote in silence, preparing for the possibility of death, planning for the hope of survival. When they finished, they sealed their letters and gave them to each other for safekeeping. "If I die, you give this to little Star. Tell her about me. Tell her I tried. And if I die, you make sure Sarah's grave is tended. There's wildflowers that grow near it. She loved those. Deal." They shook hands solemnly like two generals before battle. Then Ayanna stood stretched and looked out the window at the rising sun. 6 days until we change everything, or die trying. Tom joined her at the window. 6 days until justice, one way or another. Outside, the New Mexico sky stretched endless and blue, indifferent to human plans and desperate hopes. But somewhere under that sky, 12 children waited for rescue, and a group of unlikely allies was preparing to defy an empire to save them. The war was coming, and they were as ready as they'd ever be. Dawn came cold and clear on December 8, 1878. Tom stood on his porch watching the sun crest the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Sarah's favorite colors. He touched the brim of his hat in silent greeting to her memory, then turned to find Ayanna standing in the doorway. She was dressed in simple dark clothing, her hair braided tight against her head, the talking stick wrapped in cloth and secured across her back. Her face was calm, almost serene, but Tom could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand kept moving to check the knife at her belt. Ready. She met his eyes, and in them he saw fear and determination in equal measure. "No, but we go anyway." They'd spent the previous evening going over the plan one final time. Carlos had been inside the fort for 3 days now, working as a laborer, mapping current guard positions, and preparing the distraction. Murphy had the copied keys and knew exactly where Thornhill kept the ledger. Hastings was positioned to create confusion and misdirect attention. Maria waited 2 miles north with a wagon and fresh horses. Everything was in place. Everything except certainty. Tom checked his weapons one more time. Rifle, pistol, knife, all loaded and sharp. He wasn't planning on using them, preferred to avoid violence if possible, but he'd learned long ago that hope wasn't a strategy. You prepared for the worst and prayed for the best. Ayanna approached him, placed her hand on his arm. "Tom, if this goes wrong, if they catch us, they won't. But if they do, promise me you'll save yourself. Get out. Live. Tell little Star's story so someone remembers her." Tom covered her hand with his. "We're both getting out, with little Star and every other child in that place. I don't make promises I don't intend to keep." She searched his face, then nodded slowly. "All right, let's go get my daughter." They rode out as the sun cleared the mountains, following the route they'd scouted over the past week. The journey took just under an hour, the same time it had taken Tom to bring Ayanna to the ranch that first day, though now they traveled with purpose rather than desperation. The fort sat on high ground overlooking the Santa Fe River, its adobe walls 20 feet high and patrolled by guards who mostly looked bored rather than vigilant. Thornhill had grown complacent over the years, his power so consolidated that he'd stopped expecting real resistance. That complacency was about to cost him everything. They left their horses a mile out, tethered in a small canyon where Carlos had arranged for one of his cousins to watch them. From here they went on foot, moving through the scrub brush and rocky terrain with careful silence. Tom had learned to move quietly during his years ranching, reading the land, placing his feet to avoid noise. Ayanna moved like a ghost, her Apache training making her nearly invisible despite the morning light. They reached the prearranged meeting point, a cluster of boulders 300 yards from the fort's eastern wall, just as the sun hit its zenith. High noon, the changing of the guard, the moment when attention wavered and routines made men careless. Carlos appeared from behind the rocks, his face streaked with dirt from his work. "Everything ready," Tom nodded. "Murphy, in position. Hastings, too. They're waiting for the signal. And the children." Carlos's expression darkened. "Saw them yesterday, through the barracks window. They look thin, scared, but alive." Ayanna's hands clenched into fists, not scared for much longer. Carlos pulled out a pocket watch, checked the time. 20 minutes until the guard change. That's when I light the fire. You'll have maybe 15 minutes before they realize it's not a real emergency. 15 minutes to get into the fort, reach the children, and get them out through the drainage tunnel. 15 minutes to accomplish what should take an hour. Then we'd better move fast. They waited in tense silence as the minutes crawled by. Tom found himself thinking about Sarah, about the first time they'd met. She'd been teaching at the town school, and he'd been a ranch hand with dirt under his fingernails and dreams bigger than his bank account. She'd looked at him like he was worth something, like his rough edges were features rather than flaws. What would she think of this? Of him risking everything for people he barely knew? He'd like to think she'd be proud. She'd always said the measure of a man wasn't what he did when people were watching, but what he did when no one would ever know. Well, Sarah, a lot of people are about to know. Tom. Ayanna's voice pulled him back to the present. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Whatever happens in there, I want you to know something. You gave me back my life, my hope, my reason to keep fighting. Even if we fail, even if I don't make it out, that gift is something I'll carry to whatever comes next." Tom felt his throat tighten. "We're not failing. And you're making it out. You and Little Star both." Carlos checked his watch again. 2 minutes. Tom and Ayanna moved to the edge of the boulder field, as close to the fort as they could get without being spotted. From here they could see the guard towers, the main gate, the command building, where Murphy would soon be stealing evidence that could bring down a colonel. 1 minute. Tom's heart hammered against his ribs. Beside him, Ayanna was perfectly still, barely breathing, every muscle coiled like a spring. Now. Carlos sprinted toward the fort's stable, a small bundle clutched in his hand. He disappeared from view behind the building. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then smoke began to rise black and thick against the clear sky. Shouts erupted from inside the fort. Bells began ringing the alarm that meant fire, the one emergency that terrified everyone, in a wooden structure surrounded by dry grass. The main gate burst open, and soldiers poured out, running toward the stables with buckets and blankets. Tom saw Hastings among them, directing men with convincing urgency, making sure everyone's attention was focused on the fire. "Go." They ran. Tom had covered maybe 50 yards when he realized Ayanna was faster, her smaller frame, and Apache training, letting her move across the rough ground like wind over water. He pushed harder lungs, burning legs, pumping, closing the distance to the fort wall. The eastern wall had a blind spot where the guard towers didn't quite overlap. Carlos had marked it 3 days ago with a small pile of stones. They reached it breathing hard, pressed against the adobe, and looked up. 20 feet of wall between them and the children. Tom had brought rope and a grappling hook, tools of his trade as a rancher. He swung it once, twice, 3 times, then released. The hook caught on the top of the wall with a soft thunk. He tested it with his weight. Solid. You first. Ayanna didn't argue. She grabbed the rope and began climbing with the practiced ease of someone who'd been scaling trees and cliffs since childhood. She was over the wall in seconds, disappearing from view. Tom followed his heavier weight, making the climb harder, the rope cutting into his hands, even through his gloves. He reached the top, swung over, and dropped down into the fort. They were in a storage area, crates and barrels stacked haphazardly between buildings. Perfect cover. Tom pulled the rope up after him, coiled it, and secured it to his belt. They'd need it again on the way out. Ayanna was already moving, staying low, using the shadows and chaos to mask her passage. Tom followed, rifle-ready eyes, scanning for threats. The fort was in controlled pandemonium. Soldiers ran toward the fire officers, shouted orders, and, in the confusion, 2 people moving with purpose toward the barracks went unnoticed. The children's barracks was a long, low building on the western edge of the fort. 2 stories, narrow windows, heavy door. Normally it would be guarded, but the guard had abandoned his post to help with the fire. Small mercies. Ayanna reached the door, first tried the handle. Locked. She stepped back, and Tom saw her hand move to the talking stick. No. Save it for inside. Let me. He examined the lock. Simple mechanism meant to keep children in rather than keep intruders out. He pulled out his knife, worked the blade into the gap between door and frame, and applied pressure. The latch gave with a soft click. The door swung open. Inside was dark after the bright sunlight, and it took Tom's eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, he saw a narrow corridor with stairs at the far end. No guards. No sounds except distant shouts from the fire outside. They moved toward the stairs, each step careful and deliberate. The wood creaked under Tom's weight, making him wince, but no alarm was raised. At the top of the stairs was another corridor with 4 doors, 2 on each side. Ayanna pointed to the door on the far right. Carlos's information said that was where the children were kept. Tom nodded, and they approached. Ayanna tried the handle. This door wasn't locked. She pushed it open slowly, and what they found inside made Tom's heart clench with rage and grief. 12 children, ranging in age from maybe 5 to 10, sat on rough cots in a room that was barely large enough for half that number. They were thin, too thin, dressed in identical gray clothing that hung loose on their small frames. Their hair had been cut short, a violation of Apache tradition that was meant to erase their culture along with their identity. One of the children, a girl of about 9 with fierce eyes, stood up as the door opened. She positioned herself between the smaller children and the doorway, her small body radiating protective defiance. "Who are you? What do you want?" Ayanna stepped forward, unwrapping the talking stick, holding it where the children could see. "I am Ayanna Whitefeather. I have come to take you home." For a moment nobody moved. Then a small voice from the back of the room, tremulous with hope and disbelief. "Mama." A tiny figure pushed past the older girl, stumbled forward. She was 6 years old, with huge eyes, in a face too thin, her black hair cropped short, wearing the same gray dress as the others. But Tom would have known her anywhere from Ayanna's descriptions. Little Star. Ayanna dropped to her knees as her daughter crashed into her arms. The sound she made was beyond words, beyond language, a keening cry of joy and grief and relief that resonated in Tom's chest like a physical blow. They clung to each other, both sobbing, both trying to speak through their tears. Tom kept watch at the door, giving them this moment while monitoring the corridor. Behind him, he heard Ayanna's voice, thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I had to leave you. But I came back. I promised I would come back." Little Star pulled away far enough to look at her mother's face, touching it like she needed to confirm it was real. "I knew you would. Bright Moon said you would. She said mamas never give up." The older girl, Bright Moon, approached Ayana cautiously. "You're really here? This isn't a trick." Ayana reached out, pulled Bright Moon into the embrace. "No trick. Your mother is waiting outside the fort. She sent me to bring you home." A murmur went through the other children, hope kindling in eyes that had been deadened by despair. One of them, a girl of about 8, stepped forward. "My papa. Is my papa coming too?" Ayana looked at the child and Tom saw recognition in her eyes. This must be Walks in Rain Hastings's daughter. "Your papa is here. He's helping us right now. He sent me to get you." The little girl's face crumpled with relief. "He didn't forget me. He didn't leave me here. Never. He's been fighting for you the whole time." Tom checked his watch. 7 minutes since the fire started. Maybe 8 minutes left before someone realized it wasn't the emergency it appeared to be. "We need to move. Now." Ayana stood still, holding Little Star's hand. "Listen to me, all of you. We're leaving, right now. We have to be very quiet and very fast." "Can you do that?" 12 heads nodded in unison. "There's a tunnel under the fort, old drainage system. It comes out near a creek. A man is waiting there with horses and a wagon, but we have to get to the tunnel first." "How do we get there?" Bright Moon asked. Ayana looked at Tom. He'd studied Carlos's map of the fort, memorized the location of the drainage access. "Basement, east corner. There's a door that leads down." They moved out of the room, 12 children and 2 adults, navigating the narrow corridor toward the stairs. Tom led rifle ready, while Ayana brought up the rear, with Little Star pressed against her side. At the top of the stairs, Tom held up his hand. Voices below. 2 soldiers talking about the fire. Probably just some hay that caught. "Murphy's getting sloppy with his cigarettes again. Colonel's going to have someone's head for this. He's been paranoid about security all week." Tom looked back at Ayana, at the children. They couldn't go down with soldiers in the corridor, but they couldn't stay here either. Any moment someone might come to check on the children, might discover the unlocked door. Bright Moon tugged on Tom's sleeve, pointed down a different hallway. When Tom looked confused, she whispered, "Service stairs, for bringing up food. They don't use them much." Tom nodded his thanks and gestured for everyone to follow. They moved down the alternative hallway, the children following instructions with remarkable discipline. These kids had learned to be silent, learned to follow orders without question. The thought of what had taught them that made Tom's jaw clench with anger. The service stairs were narrow and steep, descending into darkness. Tom lit a small lamp from his pack, keeping the light low. They went down single file, the wooden steps creaking ominously under their combined weight. The basement was exactly as Carlos had described. Stone walls, dirt floor, the smell of damp and rot. In the far corner, partially hidden behind stacked crates, was a door set into the floor, the entrance to the drainage tunnel. Tom cleared the crates away, while Ayana kept the children calm and quiet. Little Star hadn't let go of her mother's hand, clinging like she was afraid Ayana would disappear if she released her grip. The door was heavy, swollen with moisture. Tom pulled hard, muscles straining, and it finally gave way with a groan that seemed impossibly loud in the enclosed space. Below was darkness and the sound of trickling water. It's going to be dark. It's going to be tight in places. But it leads to freedom. Who's brave enough to go first? I'll go. Bright Moon stepped forward, her chin raised. I'm the oldest. I'll make sure it's safe for the little ones. Tom felt a surge of respect for this 9-year-old girl who'd been through hell and still thought about protecting others. I'll go with you. Make sure you don't get lost. He looked at Ayana. You bring the others. Count to 30, then follow. Be careful. Always am. Tom descended into the tunnel, first the lamp in one hand, his other hand steadying Bright Moon as she climbed down after him. The tunnel was about 4 feet high, barely wide enough for an adult. Water ran through the center, maybe 6 inches deep, cold, and smelling of earth and stone. They moved forward, Tom crouching low, bright moon behind him. Above them, he heard the others beginning to descend. The sound of small feet splashing in water, of children trying very hard to be brave. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, the lamplight only penetrating a few feet. Tom kept one hand on the wall, feeling his way forward, testing each step before committing his weight. The last thing they needed was for him to fall, to break a leg, or drop the lamp. Behind him, Bright Moon spoke quietly. "Thank you for coming for us." Tom glanced back at her determined little face. "Thank your mothers. They're the ones who wouldn't give up. My mama's really outside. She's really outside, waiting for you. She's been looking for you since the day they took you." The girl was quiet for a moment. "I tried to be strong for the little ones, but sometimes I was scared. Being scared and being strong aren't opposites. You can be both. In fact, the bravest people are the ones who are terrified but do what needs doing anyway." "Is that what you are? Terrified?" Tom smiled in the darkness. "Completely. But your mama needed help and these children needed rescue, so here I am. Scared but moving forward. That's brave. That's life, kid. We're all just scared people trying to do the right thing." They continued in silence, the tunnel seeming to stretch forever. Tom checked his watch. 12 minutes since the fire. Maybe 3 minutes left, maybe less. He pushed forward faster, his back screaming from the crouched position, his legs burning. Then he saw it. Light ahead, the tunnel exit. Almost there. Pass it back. The message went down the line in whispers. Almost there. Almost free. Almost safe. Tom reached the exit, a circular opening partially obscured by brush. He pushed through into daylight, blinking against the brightness, and found himself in a shallow creek bed exactly where Carlos had said they'd emerge. And standing 20 feet away, rifles pointed directly at them, were 5 soldiers. At their head, wearing an expression of cold satisfaction, was Colonel Marcus Thornhill himself. "Well, well. Mr. Brennan, isn't it? The rancher with the unfortunate habit of interfering in military business." Tom's hand moved toward his pistol, but Thornhill shook his head. "I wouldn't. You might get one shot off before my men cut you down. And then what happens to all those children behind you?" Tom froze. Behind him, he heard Ayanna emerge from the tunnel, heard her sharp intake of breath as she saw the soldiers. Thornhill's gaze moved to her, and his smile widened. "Ayanna, I have to say I'm impressed. I didn't think you had it in you to come back. Most women break easier than you did." Ayanna stepped forward, placing herself between Thornhill and the children still emerging from the tunnel. Tom saw her hand move to the talking stick across her back. "You will not touch these children again." Thornhill laughed. "I'll do whatever I want with them. They're prisoners under military custody. You're the criminal here. Breaking into a military installation, kidnapping, theft. I could have you hanged. Try it." The voice came from behind Thornhill. The soldiers spun around to find themselves surrounded. Apache warriors had materialized from the brush and rocks, at least 20 of them, rifles trained on the soldiers. At their head was Running Deer, his weathered face hard as stone. "You are outnumbered, Colonel. Lower your weapons." Thornhill's face reddened with rage. "This is military property. You're attacking United States soldiers. We're protecting children who were stolen from their families. Big difference." A new voice joined the confrontation. Judge Hartman rode into the clearing, flanked by 4 federal marshals. Behind them came Maria's wagon, with Hastings and Murphy visible in the driver's seat. "Colonel Thornhill, you're under arrest." Thornhill spun to face the judge. "On what charges? Kidnapping, corruption, conspiracy, falsifying military records, and about 40 other violations I've documented, thanks to evidence provided by Private Murphy here." Murphy held up the ledger, its leather binding visible even from a distance. "Got it from your safe, sir. 1876-32, the combination you thought nobody knew." Thornhill's face went through a series of colors from red to white to purple. His hand moved toward his pistol. "I wouldn't." Tom's voice was quiet but carried absolute certainty. His own pistol was now pointed directly at Thornhill's chest. "You've lost. Accept it with whatever dignity you have left." For a long moment nobody moved. Then Thornhill slowly raised his hands. The federal marshals moved forward, disarming him, and his soldiers placing them in irons. As they led Thornhill away, he looked back at Ayanna. "This isn't over. I have friends, powerful friends." Ayanna stepped forward, pulled the talking stick from her back, and held it high. "Your friends are about to abandon you, because I'm going to tell everyone what you did, every newspaper, every judge, every person who will listen, and they'll all know you for what you are, not a soldier, not a patriot, a monster who hurt children." Thornhill was shoved into a wagon, still protesting, still threatening, but his voice grew fainter as they drove away, taking him toward justice that was 3 years overdue. The children poured out of the tunnel, 12 small bodies running toward freedom. Silent Brook was there, sweeping Bright Moon into her arms. Other Apache mothers emerged from hiding, reuniting with their children in scenes of joy that made Tom's eyes sting. And in the center of it all, Ayanna knelt in the creek. Little Star in her arms, both of them crying and laughing, and speaking in rapid Apache words, tumbling over each other in their haste to say everything at once. Tom stepped back, giving them space, and found himself beside Hastings. The sergeant had walks-in rain wrapped around him like a vine, her face buried in his shoulder. "Thank you, Brennan, for not giving up on her, on any of them." Tom nodded. "Thank you for finding your courage when it mattered." They stood together watching the reunions as the New Mexico sun climbed higher and the smoke from Carlos's controlled fire dissipated into the clear sky. Judge Hartman approached Tom and Ayanna. "There'll be inquiries, of course, federal investigations. You'll both need to testify. But with the ledger and the witnesses we have, Thornhill's finished. And more importantly, the system that enabled him is going to face serious scrutiny. What happens to the children? Can they go home?" Hartman smiled. "They already are home, right here with their families. And I've issued temporary injunctions preventing any further transfers to Indian schools pending the federal investigation. It's not a permanent solution, but it's a start." Ayanna stood still, holding Little Star's hand, and faced the judge. "I want to speak, publicly. At the Territorial Council, in newspapers, anywhere people will listen. I want to make sure everyone knows what happened here. And you will, I promise you that." As the group began the journey back toward Santa Fe, Tom found himself riding beside Ayanna. Little Star sat in front of her mother, secure in her arms for the first time in 3 weeks. The little girl looked at Tom with curious eyes. "You're the man who helped Mama," Tom smiled. "I'm Tom. And yes, I helped a little." Little Star studied him seriously. "Mama says you're a good man. Mama's usually right about people. Well, your mama's pretty smart." The child nodded sagely. "I know. She's the smartest person in the world." Ayanna laughed, the sound bright and free. "Careful, Tom. She'll have you believing all sorts of things about me." Tom met Ayanna's eyes over her daughter's head. "Too late. I already do." 6 months later, the summer sun beat down on the New Mexico territory with relentless intensity. Tom stood in the shade of his porch watching Ayanna and Little Star working in the expanded garden, their voices carrying on the warm breeze as they talked and laughed. The sound of their happiness had become the soundtrack to his days, filling spaces in his life he'd thought would stay empty forever. The transformation of his ranch over the past months had been remarkable. What had once been a solitary operation was now something approaching a small community. 3 Apache families had settled on the surrounding land, building homes and cultivating crops. Maria visited twice a week, ostensibly to deliver supplies, but really to check on everyone and share the latest news from Santa Fe. The trial had been a sensation. Newspapers from as far as San Francisco and New York had covered it, reporters filling the courtroom to hear testimony from Ayanna, from the families Thornhill had destroyed from Murphy and Hastings, and the dozens of others who finally found the courage to speak. The ledger had been damning, page after page of transactions that proved corruption at the highest levels. Payments to territorial officials, falsified orders authorizing land seizures, detailed maps showing properties taken from Apache families and immediately resold to railroad interests. All in Thornhill's meticulous handwriting, the work of a man who'd never imagined his careful records would become his downfall. The jury had taken less than 2 hours to return a verdict of guilty on all counts. Thornhill was currently serving 30 years in Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. His political allies had abandoned him the moment the evidence became public, suddenly discovering they'd never really known him well, had always suspected something wasn't quite right. The cowardice of powerful men, Tom thought, was more predictable than the sunrise. But more important than one man's imprisonment was what had come after. Federal investigators had swept through the territory, uncovering a network of corruption that stretched far beyond Thornhill. 3 territorial officials had been removed from office. 2 congressmen had chosen not to seek re-election, and new policies regarding Indian schools and land rights were being debated in Washington. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to undo the damage that had been done. But it was something. It was a start. Ayanna looked up from the garden, saw Tom watching, and smiled. That smile still had the power to make his heart skip, still caught him off guard with its warmth and openness. She was healthy, now had regained weight, moved without pain. The brand on her back had been covered with the butterfly tattoo. She'd wanted the work done by an Apache elder skilled in traditional tattooing. The transformation of Thornhill's mark into something beautiful had been part of her healing, a way of reclaiming her body from the violence done to it. Tom remembered the day she'd asked Elder Whitecloud to do the work. They'd gathered in Running Deer's hogan, the old man examining the crude tea burned into her skin with sad, knowing eyes. This mark carries pain. We will give it wings. The process had taken 3 sessions over 2 weeks. Whitecloud worked with traditional tools, ink made from natural pigments, each line deliberate and meaningful. Ayanna had sat perfectly still, her jaw clenched against the pain, refusing to make a sound. Tom had held little Star's hand outside the child, anxious for her mother. When it was finished, the butterfly spread across Ayanna's back where Thornhill's brand had been. Turquoise and black wings lifted in flight. The design incorporated the old scar tissue into something achingly beautiful. The butterfly's body followed the vertical line of the T, its wings transforming the horizontal stroke into symbols of freedom and rebirth. The first time Ayanna saw it in a mirror, she'd wept, not from pain or grief, but from relief. The visual reminder of her captivity had been transformed into a declaration of survival. "It's beautiful," Mama Little Star had whispered, touching the edges gently. "Yes," Ayanna had replied, meeting Tom's eyes over her daughter's head. "It is." But the deeper healing, the kind that mattered most, had been slower. Tom had watched it happen in increments. The first time she slept through the night without nightmares. The first time she laughed without looking surprised that she still could. The first time she touched his arm without flinching, her mind no longer associating male touch with pain. They'd grown close over these months, their relationship evolving into something neither had quite expected. Not romance, at least not yet. Though Tom sometimes caught her looking at him with an expression that made him wonder, but something deeper than simple friendship. A partnership built on respect and shared purpose, and the kind of trust that came from walking through fire together. Little Star had adjusted remarkably well, all things considered. She still had nightmares, sometimes still flinched at loud noises or sudden movements. But she was 6 years old, resilient in the way children could be, healing faster than adults, because she hadn't yet learned that some wounds were supposed to be permanent. She'd attached herself to Tom with the determination of a particularly stubborn barnacle, following him around the ranch, asking endless questions about everything from why chickens couldn't fly very well to how clouds knew where to go. He'd discovered a patience he didn't know he possessed, finding himself explaining things in ways a 6-year-old could understand. And somewhere along the way, without quite realizing it was happening, he'd fallen in love with both of them. With Ayanna's quiet strength and fierce intelligence. With Little Star's curiosity and joy. With the life they'd built together on his ranch that was no longer quite as solitary as it once had been. Tom Ayanna had walked up to the porch while he was lost in thought, Little Star having run off to play with the children from the neighboring family. "Yeah, the Territorial Council is meeting next week. They want me to speak again about the reforms they're proposing. You going to do it?" She nodded. "Running Deer says I should, that as long as I hold the talking stick, I speak not just for myself, but for all of us. It's a responsibility I can't ignore." Tom studied her face, seeing the determination there, but also the weariness that came from being constantly asked to relive trauma in service of change. "You don't have to, you know. You've done enough. More than enough. Nobody would blame you if you said you just wanted to live your life in peace." Ayanna sat down on the porch steps, and Tom joined her. They sat side by side, looking out over the ranch that had become home to so many. "I know I don't have to, but I want to. Because there are other children in other places facing what Little Star faced. Other mothers wondering if they'll ever see their children again. If I can help prevent that, even for one family, it's worth the discomfort of speaking." Tom reached over, took her hand. The gesture had become natural between them, small touches that spoke of connection without demanding anything more. "Then I'll come with you, sit in the audience. Remind you that you're not alone up there." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you. For everything. For being exactly who you are. Who's that?" "Someone I never expected to find. Someone who saw me at my worst and decided I was worth fighting for anyway." Tom felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You were always worth fighting for, Ayanna. From the moment I found you by that creek, I knew you were someone extraordinary, someone who refused to let cruelty have the final word." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that only existed between people who truly understood each other. Finally, Ayanna spoke again, her voice soft. "Little Star asked me something yesterday. About you." Tom felt his heart rate increase slightly. "What did she ask?" "She wanted to know if you were going to be her new papa." Tom didn't know what to say, didn't trust his voice to work properly. "What did you tell her?" Ayanna turned to look at him, her green eyes serious. "I told her that was a question only you and I could answer together, and that we hadn't answered it yet. And what answer do you want it to be?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I loved Nashota. I'll always love him. He was my first love. Little Star's father, a good man who deserved better than he got. Losing him nearly broke me, I know, but you put me back together. Not by trying to replace him, but by being someone entirely different. Someone patient and kind and stubborn enough to believe in me when I didn't believe in myself." She took a breath. "So I guess what I'm saying is that I'm ready, if you are, to see what we might be together. Not rushing it, not forcing it, just letting it unfold naturally." Tom felt something inside his chest expand, something that had been clenched tight for 3 years, finally releasing. "I'm ready, more than ready. I've been in love with you for months, Ayanna. But I didn't want to push, didn't want to make you uncomfortable or feel obligated. You've never made me feel obligated. You've only ever made me feel seen, valued, safe. Then yes, let's see what we can be." She leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, and they sat like that as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in those colors Sarah had loved. Somewhere inside, Tom felt Sarah's approval, felt her presence not as a ghost or a haunting, but as a blessing. She'd want him to be happy, she'd want him to love again, and somehow, impossibly, he was doing both. Little Star came running up to the porch, her face flushed with play and happiness. "Mama Tom, come see Blue had her baby." They stood together, followed Little Star to the barn where Tom's Appaloosa mare had indeed given birth to a wobbly, legged foal. The three of them stood in the stall, watching the new life, and Tom realized this was what family looked like. Not perfect, not traditional, but real and good, and worth every moment of fear and danger it had taken to get here. The territorial council meeting drew a crowd that overflowed the courthouse and spilled into the street. People had come from across the territory, some to support the proposed reforms, others to oppose them, all curious about the woman who'd become something of a legend in the past months. Tom sat in the front row, Little Star beside him, both of them watching as Ayanna took her place at the speaker's podium. She held the talking stick, and the sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows made the turquoise decorations shine. She began to speak, her voice quiet at first, but growing stronger with each word. She told her story, not dwelling on the details of her torture, but focusing instead on what had been taken and what she'd fought to reclaim. She talked about Little Star's 3 weeks of captivity, about 12 children who'd been treated like criminals for the crime of being born Apache. Then she broadened the scope, talking about the 47 families Thornhill had destroyed, the 63 children sent to schools designed to erase their culture. She talked about land theft and corruption, about a system that saw indigenous people as obstacles rather than human beings with rights and dignity. But she also talked about hope, about people like Tom and Maria and Dr. Chen and Judge Hartman who'd chosen to help when helping was dangerous, about Murphy and Hastings who'd found their conscience when it mattered most, about a community that had come together to fight injustice. We cannot undo what has been done. We cannot bring back the children who died in those schools, who lost their language and their families and themselves, but we can make sure it doesn't continue. We can demand better. We can build a future where no mother has to choose between her life and her child's safety. She held up the talking stick. This represents the right to speak, to be heard, to have our voices matter. For too long, we've been silenced, told our words don't count, our pain doesn't matter, our children are better off being someone else. I stand here today to say no more. We will speak, you will listen, and together we will make this territory a place where all its people can live with dignity. The courthouse erupted in applause, though Tom noticed some faces in the crowd remained hard and disapproving. Change, he thought, was never unanimous. There would always be those who clung to the old ways, who saw progress as threat rather than opportunity, but the majority were on their feet, clapping, some crying, moved by Ayanna's words and the truth they contained. The territorial governor, who'd come under pressure to attend, looked uncomfortable but determined. He'd already signaled his support for some reforms, pushed by the tide of public opinion and the glare of national press attention. After the meeting, reporters swarmed Ayanna, notebooks out, questions flying. Tom stayed close, ready to intervene if she needed rescue, but she handled them with grace and patience, answering questions, making clear that this wasn't about one woman's story, but about a systemic problem requiring systemic solutions. A young reporter from the Santa Fe Gazette approached Tom while Ayanna was occupied. "Mr. Brennan, I'd like to ask you some questions if you have a moment." Tom tried not to grimace. He'd avoided the press as much as possible, preferring to let Ayanna and the others do the talking. "I suppose. What motivated you to get involved in this? You're not Apache. You had nothing personal at stake." Why risk everything? Tom thought about that question, about all the easy answers he could give. But he'd learned from Ayanna that truth, even uncomfortable truth, mattered more than comfort. "Because I was half dead before this started, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. And then I found someone who needed help, and suddenly I had a reason to get up in the morning that wasn't just surviving until tomorrow. So it was about you." "About what you needed," Tom shook his head. "It started that way maybe, but it became about something bigger. About recognizing that we're all connected, that one person's pain diminishes all of us, and that standing by while injustice happens makes us complicit in it. I got involved because once I saw what was happening, I couldn't unknow it. And I couldn't live with myself if I did nothing." The reporter scribbled notes. "And your relationship with Mrs. Whitefeather. The rumors are that you're more than just allies in this fight." Tom's jaw tightened slightly. "Mrs. Whitefeather is an extraordinary woman who's been through more than any person should have to endure. Whatever relationship we have or might have in the future is private. But I'll tell you this much, knowing her has made me a better man, and I'm grateful for every day I get to be part of her and her daughter's lives." That seemed to satisfy the reporter, who thanked Tom and moved on to find other subjects. Tom made his way through the crowd to where Ayanna was finally extracting herself from the last of the journalists. Ready to go home, more than ready. They collected Little Star, who'd been entertaining herself by making friends with every child in sight, and headed toward their wagon. As they left the courthouse, Tom noticed a familiar figure standing apart from the crowd. Hastings, now Private First Class Hastings, after his demotion as part of accepting immunity for testimony, stood with Walks in Rain at his side. The girl saw them and waved enthusiastically. Hastings nodded at Tom with something approaching a smile. The sergeant Tom had learned was trying to rebuild his life and his relationship with his daughter. It wasn't easy carrying the weight of complicity, even while being praised for ultimately doing the right thing. But he was trying, showing up at the Apache settlement twice a week with supplies and apologies, slowly earning back trust. Murphy was there too, having left the military entirely. He was working as a clerk for Judge Hartman, now using his organizational skills and attention to detail in service of reforming the very system he'd once been part of. Tom had talked with him a few times, had seen the guilt and determination in the young man's eyes. Some people Tom thought were destroyed by their mistakes. Others were forged stronger by them. The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, the afternoon sun warm, but not oppressive. Little Star fell asleep between them, her head on Ayanna's lap, exhausted from the excitement of the day. "You were magnificent today. Sarah would have loved your speech." Ayanna looked at him surprised. "You think so? I know so." She believed in the power of words in speaking truth, even when truth was uncomfortable. "You embodied that today." Ayanna was quiet for a moment. "Do you still talk to her, to Sarah?" Tom nodded. "Sometimes. Less frequently than I used to. But yeah, usually when I'm making a big decision, I imagine what she'd say, what advice she'd give, and what does she say about me? About us." Tom smiled. "She says she approves, says you're stubborn and brave and exactly what I need. Says I'd be an idiot to let you go." Ayanna laughed softly. "I like her already." They arrived home to find Maria waiting on the porch, a basket of food at her feet and news written across her face. What's happened? Maria's smile was triumphant. Federal legislation. They're introducing a bill that would give indigenous families legal recourse to challenge child removal. It won't pass immediately, probably take years of fighting, but it's a start, a real concrete start. Ayanna sat down heavily on the porch steps. "Years. It'll take years." "Yes. But without what you did, without the attention this case brought, that bill would never have been introduced at all. You started something, Ayanna. Something bigger than you realize." Maria stayed for dinner, regaling them with stories from Santa Fe gossip about territorial politics, news of people they'd come to know over the past months. Dr. Chen had expanded his practice, now treating patients of all backgrounds with increasing acceptance from the community. Judge Hartman was being considered for a federal appointment. Running Deer had been invited to speak before a congressional committee about indigenous rights. Small changes, incremental progress, but movement in the right direction. After Maria left and Little Star was tucked into bed, Tom and Ayanna stood on the porch watching the stars emerge. Ayanna leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her waist, holding her close. "Tom, I'm happy. For the first time since Nashota died, I'm actually happy. Not just surviving or getting through the day, but genuinely happy. Good. You deserve to be. So do you." They stood together as darkness fell completely, the ranch quiet around them, the future stretching ahead full of possibility and challenge in equal measure. Inside the house on the mantel, Sarah's photograph sat next to a new addition, a family portrait that Dr. Chen had insisted on taking, capturing Tom, Ayanna, and Little Star together, smiling whole. 2 photographs, 2 families, both part of who Tom was, both honored and remembered. The next morning, Tom woke to find Ayanna already up making breakfast, Little Star helping by stirring eggs with intense concentration. He stood in the doorway watching them and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. "Morning, sleepyhead," Little Star grinned at him. "Mama says you sleep like a bear." "What's that mean?" Tom laughed. "It means I sleep very soundly and am grumpy when first waking up." "Are you grumpy now?" Tom walked over, ruffled her hair gently, not even a little bit. They ate breakfast together, making plans for the day. Tom needed to check the fence lines on the northern boundary. Ayanna wanted to work on expanding the garden. Little Star announced she was going to teach the chickens to dance, a goal that Tom felt was optimistic but admired for its ambition. After breakfast, as Ayanna cleared the dishes, Little Star came up to Tom with the serious expression she got when asking important questions. Tom: "Yeah, kiddo. Can I ask you something?" "Always." She took a breath as if steadying herself. "Mama says you're not my papa, that my papa was a brave man named Nashota who died before I could really know him." "That's true. Your papa was a hero. But Mama also says that families can be made, not just born, that people can choose to be family if they want to." Tom's heart hammered in his chest. "That's also true." Little Star looked up at him with those huge eyes. "So if I wanted to choose you to be my papa, could I do that? Not to replace my first papa, but to be my second papa?" Tom felt his vision blur with tears. He knelt down so he was at eye level with her. "I would be honored, more honored than you can possibly know. But it's not just your choice. It's your mama's too, and mine. And it's something we all have to agree on together. I already asked Mama. She said if you wanted to, she'd be happy." Tom looked over at Ayanna, who was watching from the kitchen with tears streaming down her face and a smile that could power the sun. "And what about you?" Tom asked Little Star. "Are you sure this is what you want?" The child nodded vigorously. "I want a papa again. And you're already kind of like my papa anyway. You teach me stuff and protect us and make Mama happy. That's what papas do. Right?" Tom pulled her into a hug. This small person who'd been through so much and still had the capacity to love fearlessly. "Then yes, I'd love to be your papa, your second papa. And I promise to do my very best to be worthy of that." Little Star squeezed him tight, then pulled back. "Does this mean I can call you Papa Tom?" "How about just Tom for now? We'll figure out names later." "Okay." She ran off to tell the chickens the news, leaving Tom and Ayanna alone. Ayanna crossed the room, stood in front of him, reached up to wipe the tears from his face. "You're sure about this? About us?" It's a lot taking on a woman with a child with trauma, with a complicated past. Tom took her hands in his. "I've never been more sure of anything. You and Little Star. You're my future, my reason for getting up in the morning, my purpose. And I love you. Both of you. Not in spite of the complications, but including them. All of you. All of this, I want it all." Ayanna kissed him, then soft and sweet a promise of things to come when they were both ready. When he pulled back, she was smiling. "Nashota would have liked you. He'd say you were stubborn and foolish and exactly right for us." Tom laughed. "High praise from a man I wish I could have met. You meet him every time you look at Little Star. She has his eyes, his laugh, his stubbornness. He lives on in her. Then I'm honored to help raise his daughter, to teach her about him and about the world, and about becoming the best version of herself." They stood together in the morning light, the cabin full of warmth and possibility, the future unwritten, but theirs to shape together. Outside, Little Star had indeed gathered the chickens and was attempting to teach them coordination. The chickens were unimpressed but tolerant, pecking at the ground while she demonstrated dance steps. Tom and Ayanna watched from the window, arms around each other, and Tom thought about the long, strange journey that had brought them here. From finding a dying woman by a creek, to building a family, from fighting corruption, to finding love, from existing to truly living. "Sarah, I hope you can see this. Hope you know I didn't forget you. I just remembered how to be alive again. Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't run out, doesn't end when someone dies. It just transforms, becomes something new, while honoring what was." As if in answer, a warm breeze stirred through the open window carrying the scent of sage and wild flowers, Sarah's favorite scents. Tom chose to believe it was her blessing, her approval, her way of saying she was happy for him. The whispers of the mesa had spoken, had told a story of survival and love of justice hard-won, and families forged from choice rather than blood. And though the fight for true equality and justice would continue for years, for generations, at least one story had a happy ending. Tom watched from the window as Ayanna lifted Little Star onto Blue's back, the mare gentle with the small rider. The child's laughter carried on the wind, bright and free, the sound of a life reclaimed from darkness. Ayanna stood beside them, one hand steadying her daughter, the other resting naturally at her side where the talking stick leaned against the porch rail. The afternoon sun caught the turquoise decorations, making them shine like promises kept. Sarah's photograph still sat on the mantel, but beside it now stood a new frame. A family smiling in the New Mexico sun. 3 people who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances and chosen every day to build something better. At least one family had been made whole. At least one promise had been kept. And in the end, Tom thought that was enough. Not to fix everything, but to fix something. Not to save everyone, but to save someone. Not to change the whole world, but to change one small corner of it for the better. Outside, Little Star's voice rang out, "Mama, look, I'm flying." Ayanna laughed full and joyous. "Yes, baby, we all are." That was enough. That would always be enough.